So after Abraham Lincoln wins the election in 1860, this is really, like I said, the straw that breaks the camel's back for the South. And South Carolina holds their secession convention 1 week after Lincoln is elected. They don't even wait a whole week, and they secede. So on November 13th, very early, there are delegates meeting in Columbia, in South Carolina, to talk about secession, and they agreed that's something that a path that they want to pursue. So to do that, sort of, the way that works is just the same as how we broke off and declared independence from Great Britain. They have to pass a sort of a formal document and then publish a list of sort of reasons why, and then sign it, and they're off. They're alone. So they sign and issue these reasons in December, and it is a unanimous vote. South Carolina is actually the only state to secede with a unanimous vote. Everyone else was a split decision. So what they passed, it basically says, "We, the people of the states of South Carolina, in convention assembled, do declare and ordain that the union now subsisting between South Carolina and the other states under the name of the United States of America is hereby resolved," which basically means the relationship between South Carolina and the United States and all the states within the United States is over. There is no longer a connection there. So they're not just severing themselves from the Union, but each state individually. And then they issue a list of reasons why. And if you want to take a guess as to what reason number 1 for secession is, according to the state of South Carolina, slavery. So if you ever have someone tell you that the Civil War was not fought because of slavery, you can laugh in their face, because that's a big fat lie. And we know for a fact that it was because of slavery, because South Carolina said so. They said, here's a reason why. Number 1, the Union is currently not protecting the institution of slavery, which is something that we want. So they list several other reasons, as well, basically states' rights is a lot of those reasons, and that is something that connects with slavery. So you can't say that states' rights isn't a reason. It definitely is, but slavery is really the big one. So after South Carolina secedes, the rest of the South follows pretty quickly. Mississippi secedes on January 9th, Florida secedes the next day, and Alabama secedes the day after that. So very quick, and then both Louisiana and Texas secede on February 1st. So the lower South is going very fast. The old South, North Carolina, Virginia, Tennessee, and Arkansas, we're going to sort of take our time about it. It's going to be a much slower process for these 4 states. They're a lot more torn than the rest. Virginia and North Carolina especially. So those 4 states actually all issue a formal warning to the federal government of the U.S. saying that any use of force against a state who has seceded would result in them then seceding. So North Carolina is basically saying, if the United States doesn't, respect the secession of these states, then we're going to go with them too. So right now we're on your side, but that's only as long as you're nice to all our friends. Texas, if you remember, I said South Carolina was the only state to secede unanimously. Some states even put it up to a vote to their people. Texas, Virginia, and Tennessee actually all allow the people of their state to vote on secession, and it passes. If you remember Sam Houston, who helped gain independence for the state of Texas, Houston, Texas, we get from Sam Houston. He actually really led the cause against secession in Texas, probably because he fought so hard to get Texas part of the United States. It would really suck if all of a sudden they weren't part of the U.S. anymore. So a couple of states even issue sort of a final set of demands, basically saying, we've, it said we know that this is happening, and we don't want to secede, so here's a few last-minute things we want in order to make this happen, but we know it's not going to work. So overall, the reaction in the North is fairly split. We've got some people saying, you know what, we're better off without the South. We're better off without slave states. It's going to be easier to make slavery illegal now. Frederick Douglass is one of those people. He says, if the Union can only be maintained by new concessions to slaveholders, let the Union perish. If, the only way we can keep our country together is by doing what a bunch of slave owners want to do, then let's not keep it together. Most people just want to make sure that whatever happens is a peaceful path. A guy named Horace Greeley says, if all the cotton states shall become satisfied in that they can do better out of the Union than in it, then we insist on letting them go. If this is a path they want to pursue, let them do it. We're not going to stop them. But overall, a fair amount of people, especially Republicans and Abraham Lincoln, don't even believe that secession is legal. They don't even believe that this is something that is acceptable. They think it sets a bad precedent. Any group that doesn't get their way can just dip out and secede from the Union, and that's not something that they think is allowable. According to Lincoln, no state should be able to leave the Union without the consent of the others. Now remember, Lincoln hasn't actually been inaugurated yet. Back then in the 1800s, we don't inaugurate in January. We inaugurate in March. So there's all this time between secession and Lincoln's inauguration that James Buchanan is still the president. And if you remember us talking about him, you should know James Buchanan is an absolute dingus, and he's doing totally nothing to help the situation. He's a lame duck president. What that means is a lame duck president. For example, Obama is a lame duck president right now. A lame duck is when you get to the end of your presidency and you have virtually no power because it's so close to the end of your time, but no one else has been inaugurated yet. So James Buchanan is doing literally nothing to help the situation. While all of that is going on, the southern states that have seceded are starting to make some serious moves. And in February of 1861, all of the states who had broken off from the Union by that point, which was everyone except for the last four, they all meet in Montgomery, Alabama. And in Alabama, they write a constitution and begin to form their own temporary government. So they write their constitution and they select Jefferson Davis to be the first and ultimately the only president of the Confederacy. He was a representative from Mississippi, and he did not want to be the president of the Confederacy. He was not into this, but no one else wanted to do it, and they wanted him, so he said whatever, and he sort of looks a little bit like Colonel Sanders. You see here in this picture, he's got a little Colonel Sanders thing going on. But they also choose a vice president. It's going to be a guy named Alexander Stephens. Alexander Stephens was from the state of Georgia. So it was meant for these guys to only sort of be the temporary executive branch. They couldn't hold an election right away. They're trying to figure out exactly how they want their government and their elections to work. And in the meantime, they need someone to run things. But an election will never happen because they're going to be busy fighting a war. And by the time they would have an election, they lose. So Jefferson Davis goes down as the first and only president of the Confederacy. So they also write a new constitution, and the first thing they write into the constitution is officially recognizing and protecting the institution of slavery. So they're already from the get-go trying to rectify all the problems that they saw in the Union. And they also write that they recognize each state as sovereign and independent. So it's not a union of people like the United States is. The United States is a union of people. The Confederacy is more of a friendship of states. So very different, much more state power than national power. Now, real quick, I want you to look at this flag right here that you see. That flag is the Confederate flag. And you're thinking, no, it's not. Steves, you're crazy. That is not the Confederate flag. I see the Confederate flag all the time on the back of rednecks trucks and t-shirts that they sell at Walmart. But I'm telling you right now, that flag is not the Confederate flag. The flag on the slide is the Confederate flag. The flag that you associate with the idea of the Confederacy is actually the battle flag for the state of Georgia and was a piece of the state flag for Mississippi and is actually still the state flag for Mississippi. But was never the Confederate flag. It was actually the top left corner of the last Confederate flag, but it was never, the whole thing was never the Confederate flag. That is incorrect. So whenever you see people running around and they say things like the South will rise again and wear shirts with that on them, I want you to laugh at them because you are now more educated than they are and you know better. So when all of this is happening, one state is leaving after another, we're going to try two things to sort of hold on. We've got two sort of last-ditch efforts at making sure that we can hold the Union together. And the first is going to be the Crittenden Compromise, written by a senator from Kentucky named John Crittenden. So John Crittenden writes in January, when secession is really starting to get on a roll, this compromise, and it's 2 amendments that he proposes. And, an amendment is much harder to get passed into law and much, much harder to undo. We only ever undo an amendment one time, and to undo it, we had to pass a whole other one. So it's really a task to undo an amendment, which is why he's doing this. He's thinking, maybe if I write something into law that's more permanent, the South will be more willing to go with it. So he has 2 amendments here. The first one basically redraws the Missouri Compromise line, but it draws it all the way from coast to coast, not just in the West, coast to coast, and says slavery will be legal above the line and slavery will be illegal. The other way around. Slavery will be illegal above the line and legal below the line. So if you look at the line, he actually cuts some slave states out of this. Missouri, Kentucky, Virginia, Maryland, and Delaware are all slaveholding states, and they will all be above the line. So to make up for that, he proposes Lincoln's idea of compensated emancipation. Let's pay for the freedom of all these slaves, so that we can make sure that we don't just tank these states' economies at the same time, because I've told you before, we are so reliant on slavery at this point that just banning it altogether is not really an option. And if we do that, then we're going to absolutely destroy the economy. That's going to happen after the Civil War. The Southern economy is going to tank from the banning of slavery, and John Crittenden knows that that's possible, so he's trying to prevent it here. The second part of the Second Amendment, as the part of the Crittenden Compromise, prohibits Congress from interfering with the transportation of slaves from one state to another. So sort of preventing Congress from interfering in the slave trade. So neither side really like the Crittenden Compromise. For the North, it's way too much. And for the South, they're like, we're past the point of no return. It doesn't really matter what you do at this point. So Lincoln doesn't really like it, but he keeps quiet on it as far as, publicly. He's not even president yet, so it's not really up to him. And they vote on it in March of 1861, and it fails, but only by 2 votes, okay? So all the Southern senators who are left in Congress refuse to vote as sort of a sign of solidarity, and all the Republicans vote no. All 23 of them vote no. Had the Southern senators voted, had only 3 of them voted, and had those 3 voted in favor of the Crittenden Compromise, then today in the United States of America, slavery would have been written into our Constitution, and we would have 2 amendments that protect the institution of slavery. And slavery would have lasted much, much longer in our nation's history, which is sort of a weird thing to think about. But that's not the way it played out, luckily. The last thing we do to try to hold the Union together is something we call the Peace Convention. In February of 1861, we hold a convention in Washington, D.C. It gets the nickname the Old Gentlemen's Convention because it's literally just a bunch of old dudes. And it's led by our former president, John Tyler, and it's basically most of the northern states and all the southern states left except Arkansas go basically to negotiate some final things and come up with a compromise. And they come up with a peace agreement, but once again it is rejected because all the Republicans band together and vote no. So no compromise is reached. Nothing happens to stop secession. And on March 4th of 1861, Lincoln is going to be inaugurated, and that's going to be enough to send those last few states over the edge. And if you know anything about North Carolina's history in the Civil War, you should know that we are the last state to secede. We will not secede until June. We are dead last. We are the first state to leave Great Britain and the last one to leave the Union.